how do you encourage new ideas and creative thinking at NashBio while still making sure everything is practical? Managing patients' data comes with big responsibilities. How does NashBio handle rules and regulations around data across different regions? Welcome to Life Science Insight podcast. I am Sendil Karnanidhi, and today we are exploring how real-world clinical, genomic, and imaging data can be leveraged to advance the discovery and development of new therapeutics. Our guest is Leeland Bekstrom, the CEO of NashBio, a company at the forefront of transforming complex health data into actionable insights. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Zenthal. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with your audience.
Okay, so let me start with my first question. For someone who's new to NashBio, how do you explain the company does and what makes it different from others in the biotech space?
So in simplest terms, our mission is really to help make complex healthcare data easy to use across some of the dimensions you indicated in your introduction. Practically, what does that mean? Well, we work with real-world data and multi-omics data, primarily genomics, but multi-omics more generally. So we're a data and analytics company in that regard.
Okay.
We work to take those data sets and transform them into ways that can be useful for a wide range of use cases across the life sciences ecosystem. Most of our customers do sit in the pharmaceutical space, whether it's biotech or larger pharma, but kind of across the board there, looking to discover new therapeutics from the use of these data, looking to understand different patient populations, maybe trying to stratify a patient population into responders or non-responders, progressors or individuals who are going to move more quickly through a disease or not otherwise. Trying to understand how patients flow through the health system in terms of how they receive care, where diagnoses take place, and how the system ultimately works. And so that's where the real-world data aspect comes in. That what's actually happening out in the clinical setting where all these drugs and treatments are deployed. But really, it's ultimately to help make sense of all these complex data. And help our clients as the end users to kind of maximize the utility and the value they can squeeze out of these data sets.
Okay, nice. So, but NashBio uses real patient samples and data to help speed up medical research. Can you explain how that works in simple terms and why it matters?
Yeah, so we're affiliated with Vanderbilt Medical Center. It's the origin of the Nash part of our name. Nash is short for Nashville in that regard.
Nashville, right?
That's right. Yeah, company was founded and is headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. We receive, or I guess I should say, Vanderbilt took a lot of steps to create some of these data assets starting about 20 years ago. And so things like de-identifying their electronic health record, structuring and normalizing it. And then collecting residual blood samples from patients who have clinical care, obviously done under consent in that regard, but using these residual samples and extracting genetic material out of those blood samples and then ultimately turning them into useful data. We, NashBio, were created to kind of be the next step in that regard. So taking the derivatives that Vanderbilt has created and making them useful to the end users in the life sciences ecosystem. So that takes several different forms, but I mean, it's practical stuff like building an engineering group that then can make these data more user-friendly and building tools and workflows and resources to help their access more smoothly. Obviously, building a business development team that can go out and speak the same language as the customers that we're working with and identifying use cases and really helping translate the data from a technical thing to this is the problem it's helping the client solve. But I think the overarching piece of this is just the customer orientation and really trying to focus on, again, I go back to that mission of making data easy to use for our customers, but making sure that actually they can get what we're delivering. So whether that means we're answering a question for them, we're performing an analysis, maybe we're just building a data set using those specific resources. We try and be as flexible and responsive as possible so that it actually does address the customer-specific problems and not just we have a hammer and therefore every problem looks like a nail and we're going to hit it that way. So that customer-centric focus is a big part of what we try to aspire to.
Nice, interesting update. So if you had to set one big bold goal for NashBio over the next 5 years, what would it be?
It's a good question. We are so we were founded in 2018. So we're about 7 years old at this point. We've had a couple of different horizons of over the history of the company. At this point, we're in the midst of our third evolution, I will say, and that's ultimately moving away from a heavy services focus with our customers to moving to more of a technology focus. And again, practically, what does that mean? Is like, well, we're in the process of standing up a data platform where our customers can directly access the data sets and touch and feel the data themselves directly, and then we're here to help advise and consult and be a additional resource as opposed to the only entry point. Historically, the work we did, somebody would come and ask us a question, our fingers would be on the keys, and then we'd produce an end result for them. So a much more guided approach, but frankly hard to scale.
Yes.
So the goal for the next few years is really to perfect that model. How do we function in that new model? What does it mean to be I guess a data as a service company?
Yes.
That's exactly the model. So how do we be successful in that new model? What does it mean from a kind of across all the different functions within our team? How do we go to more of a product thinking where we have to understand in advance what the customer is looking for and making sure that we're building stuff that's going to be useful? The benefit of our earlier model was it's very responsive. Right?
Oh, really?
Somebody asks the question and we can build exactly to that. But a challenge to scale because you have to be able to do it in real time here. Where in the future model, where we're having to look at the market, look at competitors, look at kind of what's actually being demanded in the market, and then building in that direction. But it obviously puts a greater emphasis on making sure you're right in that regard. And so I think our big goal for the next few years is really to perfect that model, to figure out how our customers to be successful. And there's various sub pieces of that, but as an overarching goal, it's really perfecting this new business model and helping our customers in this new fashion.
Cool. Looks like you're working on a lot of new ideas, but how do you encourage new ideas and creative thinking at NashBio while still making sure everything is practical and useful in the real healthcare settings?
Yeah, so that's another good question as well. I mean, a lot of it is talking to your customers. I mean, and being able to listen. So learning how to ask good questions and making sure that you're asking those questions in regularly and frequently, and not just episodically. In terms of what we do internally in the organization, I mean, this will be part of the evolution that I just described. We're going through. But again, encouraging a very open organization. Ideas can come from anywhere. Starting to put in place structures to be able to collect those ideas and catalog them and then work through them. So
yes,
importance of having some structured approach around this so that we can assess this is a good idea, there's customer demand for it, this is within our skill set and capability. We're actually going to be able to deliver on this in a timely fashion and get rewarded for it eventually. So like we're certainly learning through that process. I think in the early days, we would tend to iterate a fair bit more, or not iterate a bit more, but I guess as part of being that responsive model, you had the opportunity to kind of pivot quickly. And it works when you're a small organization and kind of a small scale. But as you get to be bigger, we're about 40 people now at this point. And as I said, with the new business model, having to put some of the structures in place where we're kind of assessing all the new ideas and kind of picking and choosing selectively, and not just whipsawing around, I guess, or not just responding to kind of the whatever request comes in. So it's a bit of a balance to say, I just said one of our goals is to be customer centric. And I think the challenge of being customer centric in a structured matter is what's ahead of us now.
Nice. NashBio is all about data, right? With AI and data tools getting better every day, how is NashBio using this technology in its work?
Yeah, it's I mean, certainly we're in the midst of the first AI hype cycle in that regard, and every AI is everywhere in that regard.
Yeah.
For us, I think the some of the practical things we're thinking about with AI have to do with goes back to generation of data. How do we, so maybe a slight digression, the types of clinical phenotype data we get from an electronic health record often divides itself into structured and unstructured data. Structured data is stuff that is very easy to put in tables. So it's things like laboratory values, medications, procedural coding and diagnostic coding that comes from the healthcare system. there's a whole volume of information wrapped around that, which is referred to as unstructured data. That's things like clinical text, that's things like imaging, waveforms. The challenge in those types of data, they're difficult to work with. There's a ton of richness in there. And I often describe it kind of the skeleton versus the body that gets wrapped around it. So the structured data is the skeleton. The unstructured data is all of the body that gets wrapped around it. So that's where the interesting stuff is. It's where a lot of information is contained. Things like, how did a patient respond when you put them on therapy? Why did they progress further in their disease? Why did we switch them to new therapy? So a lot of insight into clinical decision making and a real depth of information. But given that it's a challenging data type to work with, I think that's an area where we're very actively exploring AI or more advanced analytic tools, things like natural language processing. So being able to go in and extract information from those things like those notes or those images so that our customers don't have to struggle with that data extraction. We see that as a real benefit for our customers and something where AI can be very practical for us. Some of the other areas we've been thinking through is like building pipelines that have AI ML in them for cleaning and quality control of the data. How can you start to standardize and deal with things like outliers and mismatch? Real world data by definition is messy, right? The physicians and healthcare providers are busy in that regard. They are often entering information quickly, and so maybe there's an error gets made in a unit, or they entered 10 kilograms as opposed to 100 kilograms in the data. So dealing with a lot of those errors that come through in real world data, we see that's another opportunity for some of these more advanced tools. Can you start to build repeatable and almost learning systems that will then deal with the imperfections and ultimately get to a better or cleaner and more standardized data set? I think longer term, there's a lot of opportunity for being able to interpret the data, and at least in a data provider context, I'd be really excited about learning how to make inferences and interpretations of the data. So I think right now I have a clinical team that is very adept at doing chart review and kind of going through the clinical text and coming up with a summary of the diagnosis of the patient's condition. How can we augment that with AI over time? Can we use AI to start to infer parameters that may be missing in the health record in some regard? That's, again, one of the challenges of real world data is not everything gets written down. Physicians don't always measure the same parameters that end users in the pharmaceutical or diagnostic space would like. It's a key difference between real world data and clinical trial data. At some point, could we start to use artificial intelligence to fill in some of those gaps? And all right, there's 6 data points in the record, and we're missing 7th, but we have enough data from those 6 that we could make a prediction using something like a generative AI model. So for us as a data provider, I think our use is all of those things. Certainly, our customers are exploring more forward, or I guess that more advanced analytics in terms of starting to knit all these different data types together. So in thinking about somebody who's trying to discover a new drug or a new therapy, there's yet a whole nother layer of AI application that comes there. But at least for the near term, our focus is going to be on things that I described, maximizing as much information as possible out of the data, cleaning it up, and then ultimately thinking about inference and synthesis of the information we have access to.
Yeah, interesting. So how do you see the real world data changing the way we discover and develop new medicines in the next 10 years?
Yeah, this real world data is, I mean, it's been used for a long history already. I think the place we sit in terms of this fusion of genomics or multi-omics and real world data is certainly a newer trend, maybe in the past 10 years in that regard. And there's a couple different threads of how this is going to continue over time. Certainly, there's a big body of literature around the use of human genetic evidence in drug discovery. So Matt Nelson, who sits on our scientific advisory board, is one of the leading authors in this space, but showing how in order for a drug discoverer to truly understand a disease at the genetic level or the molecular level, having the strength of that evidence makes it much more likely that drug's going to succeed. And so that's where we're seeing an expansion. There's been a huge expansion of interest in this space over the past 10 years. Examples would be some of the large consortia initiatives that have come together. Pharmaceutical companies have come together to generate these data at ever larger scale. Our own Alliance for Genomic Discovery initiative with Illumina and a number of other large pharma. Some of the big consortia initiatives for the UK Biobank. It's all about getting to bigger scale of these data types in order to unlock some of the benefit that comes from having this evidence. And so I see over the next 10 years, that trend just continuing to improve or continuing to accelerate. We're going to see ever larger data sets come online that 10 years ago, maybe a 50,000 or 100,000 subject data set was big. Now the data set we have access to is millions of subjects with 250,000 whole genomes. I'm certainly aware of efforts that are moving that into the millions of subjects of genomic data, and that's absolutely going to continue. With the benefit of real world data here is a picture of how a drug is actually going to perform out in the clinic. So setting aside the genetic side of it, or the genetic part of the data that we have, the real world data actually reflects what happens when you put it into a patient population. So we're seeing more and more sophistication around exactly understanding that, and whether it comes feeding that back into clinical trial design, understanding patient journeys of how somebody moves through a disease process. What does the diagnostic process look like? When are they treated? How is that managed over time? We're seeing more and more of this data collected and ultimately hooked together, which is only just going to improve or enhance our understanding of how these things like these drugs and diagnostics are performing out in the real world. So maybe to summarize, ever larger scale, more and more data points. So moving to more of a complete picture of what's happening in the patient. And then maybe the third one I'll add on to is just an expansion of kind of the modalities available. That touches both sides of it. The genomics I referred to is now becoming, that's where multi-omics is becoming more and more of a thing. And practically what that means is just opening up other layers of molecular data. So moving from genomics to proteomics to metabolomics, and each one provides a different picture of what's happening in the human body or disease processes. We've already started to see some proteomics initiatives come online, metabolomics, and further down the line, but kind of in addition to these larger scale data sets, more richer data sets with these molecular information. And then I forget what the other point was I was going to make, but we'll stop there.
Yeah, that's an interesting update. So you gave a lot of insights on this. So my next question is, you worked with many hospitals and research groups. What do you think makes a great partnership?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, as I say, we have a special and privileged relationship with Vanderbilt Medical Center in that regard, where we benefit from a lot of work they have done over the years to build these data assets, and then we are now taking it to the next level in a domain they hadn't initially envisioned when they first started down this path. So how does that work? Well, I guess, I mean, obviously it sounds simple or obvious, but like frequent communication in terms of what each side is doing in that regard. Here's our priorities. Here's what we're hearing from the market or from our customers. Here's the things that we need in order to move our business to the next level. And maybe that means there's new data types that we need to explore. There's data we don't have access to. Is changes in clinical practice that we don't fully understand. So being able to go ask some of the physicians that ultimately are seeing the patients and on the front line, but having those channels of communication and knowing how information can flow. We also provide a lot of feedback back to our colleagues at Vanderbilt in terms of, as I say, things like data quality and if there's errors in the data set or if there are problems that we see or better ways that could be done. We're very happy to provide that feedback, and they're very accepting of that feedback. I mean, that's kind of the benefit or the definition of a partnership in that regard. We're mutually benefiting each other, and in this case, where Vanderbilt supports a large research community with these data assets as well, anything we can do to collectively make it better for the broader user base, it helps us, it helps them, and flows both ways. Some of the other ways that we've helped support this partnership, we've engaged in some large-scale data generation activities. So I referenced the Alliance for Genomic Discovery Initiative. We started this with Illumina and 8 large pharma companies 2 years ago to whole genome sequence, but 250,000 subjects from our DNA biobank. And so as part of that effort, that data was all able to go back to the research community at Vanderbilt. So the pharmaceutical partners have access to it, and our research colleagues at Vanderbilt have access to it as well. And so in that regard, they had taken kind of the initial steps to prepare and build the resource. We were able to take that next step and kind of unlock it in terms of actually turning tubes of DNA in a freezer into useful data that everybody's going to benefit from. So that'd be a good example in this partnership of a win-win-win type situation. Yeah, win-win-win type of situation. But again, foundation is communication. Yes. Foundation is understanding what are your objectives, what are our objectives, and figuring out how we bring those together so that both sides benefit from the interaction.
Interaction, yes. Yes. Can you share some success story or project that shows the kind of impact NashBio is making in the medicine today?
We're at this point, so to say, company launched in 2018. We have worked with more than 80 different pharmaceutical and diagnostics organizations over the years. The very largest pharmaceutical companies to very small biotechs that are in the very early stages of their research and development journey. Just by the nature of the work we do, we're often not privy to what happens after we've helped somebody answer a question, that especially early stage research and before stuff really gets into clinical trials. A lot of the clients we work with do tend to keep that information to themselves, right? We co-discover something or help them to discover something, they're going to keep it close to the vest. So the metric we usually look at in that regard is just how often do we get to work with somebody again, right? Did they find value in the whatever we did for them the first time? Do they come back and work with us again? And by that measure, we're quite proud of the track record we've had. I'll give some anecdotes. I guess the Alliance for Genomic Discovery Initiative, AGD. It was 8 large pharmas that joined that effort. 6 of those 8 had worked with us in some fashion before. So 75% of them having had a prior relationship with us. Similar sort of percentage, I'll call it somewhere probably around 60% of the clients come back for a second or third or fourth interaction. Excuse me. And so it's that repeat measure that says to us that yes, whatever we did for you, whatever problem we helped solve in the prior instance or in the first interaction was enough to motivate you to come back. Our clients do publish papers sometimes, and that's in a scientific field like ours. That's another way to measure success. So there's probably a dozen or more publications and probably twice as many of that, conference abstracts and things where our clients have then put stuff out into the domain or the public domain for consumption. So it's things like showing how the cost effectiveness of different treatments varies with the launch of new drugs. It's the identification of new mechanisms underneath some different rare disease populations we've worked in. It's discovering new genetics in particular disease areas that then go on and form a target discovery or drug discovery, subsequent drug discovery activity. So there's a lot of different proof points, but I guess the overall way we measure that success is, does somebody want to come back and do business with us again?
Yeah, true. That's true. I have a next interesting question for you. Managing patients' data comes with big responsibilities. How does NashBio handle rules and regulations around data across different regions?
Yeah, it's a good question and something we think about. Right? It was wired into the creation of NashBio in that regard, and I'd say even our predecessors at Vanderbilt who built these resources. I mean, ultimately, you're right. This is patient information that we are tasked with handling. There's a ton of potential with it, but if it's not handled appropriately, you can clearly lose that trust very quickly. Yes. So things like de-identification are obviously a very kind of the first layer that gets employed here. We de-identify all the data, or I should say Vanderbilt de-identifies the data sets, then we verify that de-identification to make sure that it's the scientific content that remains in the data we have, but not anything that identifies or gets it back to a particular patient. That was part of the initial bargain with the way Vanderbilt set up these resources, that patients, we'd love for you to participate in these resources with the promise that you won't be identified, that your privacy will be protected in that regard. After de-identification, it comes to things like security and the technical perimeter that we build around the resources we sit in. So we are a cloud-based company, but we have a very active presence in terms of the security monitoring and the infrastructure we build. We implement things like least or minimum necessary. So within our teams, for example, nobody has access to everything in that regard. You have access to what you need to, and we're quite active in terms of shutting or managing that access, obviously surveilling ourselves regularly to make sure that there's not holes or vulnerabilities. Certainly working with the clients that we work with, they equally take these sorts of considerations at a premium. So things like making sure that the residual personal health information or personal identifying information, all of that is removed, and that we know where the data is ultimately going to go and how it's going to be used. So can we establish mutual trust between us and the clients we're working with? Some of that is particularly sensitive data types will host ourselves, and so it'll be our teams directly that would make use of that. Example of that would be things like that some of those unstructured notes or unstructured or the imaging data I referred to in those cases where maybe we're using advanced tools to be able to process those, but in a lot of cases there's still human eyes involved in verifying that those data have been stripped of any possible identifiers. Where we can, making extracts of data. So instead of somebody having to wrestle with a whole piece of clinical text, there's a specific data point that they want in there. Well, we're going to go figure out how to extract that data point, right? That's sort of the basis of a natural language processing approach. So kind of getting the information out without having the stripping away any of the other risk that comes around it. But it's something that keeps our CTO and his engineering team awake and on their toes on a daily basis. It's something I think about regularly as well, that you have to put that first in this space, because I say if you mess it up, you can't gain that trust back if you do mess it up.
That's true. So I have next a leadership question for you.
Yeah.
What's your leadership style, especially when leading a team in such a fast-paced, high-stakes field? How do you define this?
Yeah, it's partly defined, I guess, by some of the other work experience that I have. And what I mean by that, I was at a large management consulting firm before I came and created NashBio. And that organization put a real premium on kind of, it's a flat model, I shall say. Like there's not a lot of hierarchy built into that, but kind of opportunity for everybody to contribute, and really an obligation to dissent was the motto that that particular employer instilled in us. And so I've taken a lot of those practices over to NashBio. I do try to run a fairly flat organization. Your prior question about how to get creative ideas out was like, well, creative ideas come from everywhere in the organization, right? So like being able to having an environment where everybody feels like they can speak up and contribute and volunteer those ideas, and that we'll listen to them. And as I say, it doesn't mean we do everything that gets surfaced in that regard, but at least an environment where everybody is able to contribute and feels like they have the opportunity to speak up. So that's been a big part of my big part of the leadership style. I do believe in honesty and transparency in that regard. I find that partners, employees, clients, even like if you're making decisions, especially if it's an adverse decision, we had to go in a different direction or we had to stop doing something, people understand if they can understand the reason what's going there, it's a lot easier to process that. So we had to stop building this particular project rather than just saying we're shutting it down. Well, what's the reasoning for it? It's like, well, I don't know, the client sponsor had to pull back, or we ended up getting some new market intelligence, and maybe this particular development activity wasn't going to be valued, something like that. But certainly being upfront with the people I work with, explaining where we are from a company basis in terms of things like our financials, and making sure that we're all moving in the same direction. That if people don't have that information, if they don't share the vision, it's hard to move. It's hard to move quickly. And being able to move back and forth. So the kind of the combination of those two things, the more flat or a flat leadership style and an honesty and transparency. Admittedly, this is a bit harder in a remote model, but I mean, at times you just have to have some fun with people as well, right? So NashBio is a virtual company. We're kind of scattered across the United States, and then we have a few people outside the US as well. So we don't have the benefit of that office environment, but we do try and get people together on a regular basis, kind of every 6 months, the whole group of us, and smaller groups over time. That's so you can build familiarity with people as well. That it's one of the, I guess, risks of a Zoom environment. It does create a more transactional, or it has the risk of creating a more transactional set of interactions. So you have to find time to build that in as well. People work together. People work better together when they know each other and know what's going on in their lives. So even things like I had a meeting this morning where we had an hour-long agenda, but we spent the first 15 minutes talking about somebody had questions about their kids going to school over the next couple of years. And so those of us who have kids older, like, all right, let's just chat about this for a few minutes, right? We'll set the agenda aside. And it was an opportunity to, again, build some camaraderie, build some familiarity.
Exactly. That's true.
So that'd be my approach.
Yeah, that's good. But what are some of the key decisions or turning points that really shaped the company's direction and culture?
Oh, yeah. So reflecting back on our history, I mean, I guess certainly the decision to launch the company initially was obviously probably the first one in that regard. Some of the early decisions we made, how we set things up with Vanderbilt in terms of what they would do and what we would do. We started initially, as I said, in a services model, and actually it was a fairly derivative, or working with fairly narrow slice of the data. We had some kind of very very specific use cases that we were pursuing. Some of our partners at Vanderbilt had done a lot of work in terms of drug repurposing, trying to find new uses for existing drugs. And so that was the first area we explored. In our case, it wasn't existing drugs. It was trying to apply some of those same methods to drug pipelines and kind of novel therapies. But working with kind of narrow slivers of the data as opposed to large quantities of it. We had a little bit of success, but I can't say it was going to be wonderfully successful. It certainly wasn't going to support a growing company over a long period of time. And so we started to iterate through some different uses. And that was where kind of opening up, listening to our customers, but opening up the amount of data that we're making use of, and bringing those things together, that sent NashBio on a very different trajectory. So starting to build different patient cohort or different subject cohorts using the electronic health record data, sequencing or analyzing those data sets to certain customer specifications. So somebody wants to study diabetes, we'll build them a diabetes cohort, we'll help them analyze it, we'll sequence the population and provide them the end results. And so that was kind of the second period of NashBio, which came about from, again, listening to the market, listening to our customers.
Okay.
The third period was in the most recent period was the move towards some of this large scale consortium activity. So picking or working to bring together a select group of partners and really accomplish a big goal. In this case, it was that large scale sequencing. So generating 250,000 whole genomes. It was a complex relationship to put together. It took us a couple of years from a business development standpoint. But then given the size of it, it required a different operational style. So we had to build a lot more process within NashBio to be able to deliver that. Leaned heavily on a couple of our partners as well. But taking those practices and really starting to build the scaffold of a larger company or a more scalable company in there. And then that sets us up for the pivot I talked about earlier, moving to more as data as a service that, again, product orientation, building ahead of demand or building where you think the market is going to go. And then puts a premium on some of the processes that we developed through the big sequencing initiative, things like data quality checks and building in quality control layers to the data sets, thinking about how over time we're going to fill in gaps and deal with errors in the data set. All of those pieces are kind of direct derivatives of the big sequencing initiative, and it'll be important for this next horizon of NashBio.
Nice, very nice. My last question for today call. What advice would you like to give to young scientists or entrepreneur who want to develop a biotech company someday?
Ooh. Yeah, it's there's practical, and then there's probably more conceptual or visionary. I mean, there's certainly a risk taking involved, and if you have to be comfortable with that risk in terms of jumping out, especially maybe you're already working in an area, have an existing job, but you've got a great idea. You have to be comfortable with that risk and the fact that the idea may not pan out. So like getting comfortable with that, and that's not for everybody, right? There's certainly those who are attracted to entrepreneurship and company creation and more comfortable with that. But if you can get over that hurdle, it can be tremendously enjoyable and exciting over time. Some of the stuff I've talked about just in terms of the pivots and the iteration we've had to go through over time to find models that work. I think that's an incredibly important part of any new company creation activity, that just your first idea, maybe not your best idea, or your first idea is the start of one, but it involves some refining and improvement and iteration. So like being very open and not too hidebound to whatever you started with. It may well be that you do have to pivot or go in a different direction. As I say, you may have to stop doing some stuff that you were initially doing, take a pause, whatever. Like just important part of being responsive in that regard. And maybe the third piece, it's more recently occurred to me, but like availing yourself of expertise in whatever you can. That in a small company, there's often a lot of pride in just kind of figuring stuff out. And like, all right, I often hear that there's four of us here, and one day I'm doing IT, and one day I'm doing finance, and one day I'm doing the scientific development. And that happens. Figuring out ways to leverage expertise sooner. So whether that's tapping your network to get advice sooner, we've had real success over the past couple of years with bringing in different fractional executives, and that's been a real eye opener for me. That whether it's tapping a fractional CFO or a fractional chief marketing officer, I would, other people in early stage companies, like, definitely look at those sorts of resources, because you get the benefit of really high caliber expertise, and it can speed things up immensely by having people, like, rather than going and figuring stuff out from first principles in some of those areas, or just kind of brute forcing it, having that expertise to come in where somebody's already done it. And the fractional benefit of not having to buy somebody and kind of a full hiring only full-time employees. So again, it goes back to that flexibility and building as much flexibility in, but finding ways to tap other expertise and not just assuming that you have to do it all yourself.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, it's very interesting. Thanks for spending time with me today. It was insightful discussion today. Thanks for time again.
Great. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.